Welcome to Fear Street. My family and I lived in a home that had an outhouse in Scott County, Virginia, about 20 years ago. There was no indoor toilet. We had running water, but just couldn't get a proper septic system in there. The outhouse was up the hill a ways, about 30 yards. This was in a valley. The nearest neighbor was roughly 4 miles away. Good luck if you need an emergency service. We had 3 dogs. The biggest of all was a lab mix named Bear. Bear was a very loyal and territorial dog. It didn't matter what time of day it was, he'd go with you up to the outhouse and wait outside. This was normal behavior for years. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about him and welling up with tears. He was a damned good dog. One night my mom needed to go and he went with her. We'd normally just walk up and do our business and then head back and go to sleep. We had no AC, just windows and fans. Bear followed Mom up there, and this time he was between Mom and the woods. There was a solid tree line around the house that you couldn't see into at all. I've hunted it, but I'd get my ass back to the house before it got even close to dark. Bear felt or heard something. The more my mom tried to get up, the more he was growling. He had never behaved this way before. My mom, a devout Baptist, swears in the Bible that she heard what sounded like grunting coming out of the woods. She could feel something either stomping or punching the ground. Think of punching dough. It had that sort of thud. That's what she described it as. Now, my mom was raised by some serious hillbillies and isn't scared of anything in the woods, so she forced her way up there. She thought it was a deer, as they'll do that in rut season. Bear sat out there growling, and she said that every hair on him was standing up straight. He wasn't barking. She could feel his growling. Like, I don't know how to describe, like you feel bass from a subwoofer. She got done and came back to the house. There were no other issues that night. A few nights later, a friend was staying with me. He grew up poor like us, but he was a good dude. His mom and dad were great. Anyway, it's about 11 or 11:30 p.m. It was Friday or Saturday. I remember because we had a 10 o'clock bedtime on weeknights and we were playing Killer Instinct on Nintendo 64. Man, when I say this scared me, we heard a scream and felt a noise come from the woods about 150 yards up that mountain. I got goosebumps coming up like crazy right now. I kept playing thinking that my brain was playing tricks on me. 5 minutes later, it happened again. This time it was maybe 75 to 100 yards up and it was heading down. I stopped and asked my friend if he had heard it, and he said that he had. My fight or flight instinct kicked in and we were in a panic. I checked up on my mom and little brother and both were fine. I woke my little brother up and told him what was going on, and we grabbed our rifles. I only had a .30-06. My friend had my 20 gauge and my little brother had a .22. We went back into the room we were in when we first heard it. When I tell you my heart was racing, I felt like I had just done a 100-meter dash. We didn't hear a thing for 30 minutes, just quiet. We had the windows open due to having no AC and the fans were off. We started hearing a noise coming from the woods, just walking. It sounded like something was slowly plodding down the ridge to the house. I know it was no cat. You'll never hear a big cat. I've had cougars surprise me and I never heard a thing. This was big. It was making a lot of racket. We just kept sitting there, ears on alert. Then, we heard a scream again. This one shook our windows, literally. Everything shook. There was nothing at that point that we could have done. It was within 25 yards of our house, and we were petrified. Bear was just pacing back and forth. He wanted to get out. I didn't want him to go, and neither did my little brother. He was our safety blanket in that moment. We decided to just hang out in there, and we started hearing the grunting. All I can say is, I've heard deer and rut. This was way too guttural. This feeling of dread came over all of us. We all started bawling. We legit felt like we were gonna die. Mom finally woke up and came in there. She saw all of us holding our guns and she was like, "What are y'all doing?" I put my hand up to my face. She saw we were crying and I put my index finger to my mouth to shush her. The grunting kept going, louder and louder. Then the pounding started. It wasn't hitting a tree or anything. It was hitting the ground, punching the hell out of it. We could feel each hit. Mom said this was what she had heard the other night, but that she didn't think much of it. This seriously scared me. The grunting and pounding suddenly stopped. Mom decided to send Bear out. Nikki and Bella, our other dogs, didn't move. Bear was just a badass and we were his family. He beelined it up there. That was it. We heard one yelp and nothing else. We didn't hear anything else that night. For several days, it was that way. Bear was gone and we were all shaken up. I think it was 5 or 6 days later, my stepdad went to use the outhouse and laying next to the building was Bear. I swear on my life that this dog was literally torn apart. There were no bite marks. It wasn't a cat. He had literally been ripped apart, limb from limb. I don't know what it was. It could have been a bear. I don't know. I know that we moved out of there a month later and that place can't keep people in it anymore. I can't say for sure what we heard, but it was definitely one of the worst experiences of my life. Back in the 80s, my family and I had a house in Southwest Florida. For over a week, I believe our neighborhood was stalked by a werewolf. It was June, I think, and around 9 p.m., I was out back on the patio. At that time, no one had fences around their property because all of us knew the other families around the area. The only exception was the family across the street from us. They had a 7-foot-tall cinder block wall behind their house. They had a large wooded piece of property and kept equipment out there. The dad was in construction and the wall enclosed 3 sides of the property. It was hot out and there was a slight breeze. There were no clouds and it was starry. As I sat there, you could hear the dogs in the neighborhood begin to bark. Then everything got quiet. A lone howl started. I howled back. I do this rather well. I'd watch Nat Geo and mimic wolf cries. Anyway, this went on for about 5 minutes. Each time the howl from the other end got closer. Down the road are train tracks that run north to south. The sound seemed to emanate from that direction. I started to get spooked, and the howling stopped. Our yard had bushes and a tree on the side where the sound had come from. Suddenly, the hair on my arms and neck started to stand up, and I felt like I should go in. As I stood, I heard movement by the bushes. I glanced over and saw something move. I didn't wait to see what it was. I just booked it into the house and stood by the door, which had glass panes in it. I watched as something very large and dark moved about the bushes. It moved away, and I could no longer see it from my vantage point. So I went to the front porch to look out the windows, hoping to get a look at whatever was there, but it never came out that way. So I went to bed and read for a while to calm down. Less than an hour later, my brother came home. He came to my room and was as white as a sheet of paper. He was shaking all over, his eyes the size of saucers. I asked him what was wrong. Now, my brother's the sort that has an explanation for anything unusual, and he's a big guy, so for him to be in this state was not normal. He said, "I need you to come with me right now. I'll explain when we get to the truck." I was still dressed, so I got up and went with him. When we got outside, I asked him what was going on. He told me there was something in the road by the tracks, and that he needed to show me. I wasn't happy about that, as I had just had my own experience with something from that way. As we got there, it looked as if something had exploded all over the road. There was blood everywhere, as if something was mowed down in that spot, but there were no body parts anywhere. My brother then related what he had seen coming down the road. He said, "I was coming home, and as I got closer to the tracks, there was this huge thing lying in the road. I thought it must have been a Mastiff or Great Dane, but as I pulled up to it, it didn't look like any dog I'd ever seen. It was hairy. Its head and nose were twice the size of a dog. The body wasn't a dog, just dog-like, but much, much bigger. It was all over the place. There was an arm laying on the road. Not a dog arm, a human arm. But when me and my brother got back to the spot, there was no trace of anything, and it had only taken us a few minutes to get there. I said that we should get the hell out of there now, and so we went back home. Then I told him what I had experienced just before he got home. A couple of days later, my sister came to me and told me she'd been seeing a large dog prowling around at night. It was huge, and she'd seen it across the street as she sat on the porch. I told her what my brother and I had seen, and not to be outside alone until we could find out what was going on. We got together and decided to stake out the yard over the next night. Sure enough, it was back in the neighbor's yard. This thing was about the size of a Shetland pony, and all black in color. We turned our flashlights on it, and it took off to the back wall behind the house. The neighbor's dog was going crazy. It was a small terrier. We watched this dog thing scale the wall. The neighbor came out to see what was going on, and we shouted that there was something in his yard. He went back in and grabbed his pistol and went around back, but by that time it was gone. My family and I were headed to my parents' home in Crockett on State Highway 21. Under normal circumstances, I would have taken Highway 7, as it's a much better road, but it had been raining all week, over 9 inches on that day alone, and roads were washed out everywhere. A family member at the funeral had assured me that the drainage on 21 was much better than 7, and I didn't want to risk getting stranded or washed away, so I followed the advice, and as it turned out, we made it to our destination, albeit later than expected. I also wasn't expecting what I saw on the way. As I said, it had been raining for days, and it was pouring rain for almost the entire drive. The area along Highway 21 is very rural and very dark at night because it's mostly farmland with the homestead set far out and away from the highway. The traffic that night was all but non-existent, fortunately, because it was difficult to see well with it raining so hard. I was driving slowly with my low beams because the rain was all I could see with the lights on high, so I had my nose to the windshield, just trying to stay on the road. Just before you enter Davy Crockett National Forest, you come upon Caddo Mounds State Historic Site, which are ancient burial mounds on either side of the road. Right near the entrance to the site, and almost in the roadway, were 4 white-tailed deer behaving very erratically. I came to a full stop, thankful that I'd seen them before I hit one. It was as if they weren't sure where to go. It looked like they were in a hurry to be somewhere, but didn't want to get split up. One would dart one direction and the others would follow, only to stop and change direction again. They seemed to be oblivious to everything around them. I eased past them as quickly as I could because one almost ran into the side of my car. My wife, who was up front in the passenger seat, said, "That was odd." My son was sitting in the middle of the back seat between his 2 sisters. He came to attention when I stopped, wanting to see what was going on. I asked them both to help me watch for more deer because hitting one would have been a disaster in that downpour. My son asked me what the deer were doing out in the rain and why they weren't seeking cover. At the instant I was about to answer, we were now inside DCNF and nearing the Neches River. Something ran out in front of the car on 2 legs, from right to left. My headlights illuminated the lower half of its body, but I could see the silhouette of the upper body as it ran. It was enormous. It happened very quickly, so quickly that I never had time to brake. The strides were so long that I don't think its feet hit the pavement more than twice. I remember that the legs were covered with dark hair, and it seemed to have no ankles. The thickness of the legs was consistent down to its feet. My son immediately turned around to get another look and exclaimed, "What was that?" I said that I didn't know, nor did I wish to know. We discussed it with each other during the remainder of the trip, and with my parents the next day. No one had ever heard of anything like it in that area. Most everyone I told it to believed that the rain had obscured our vision, and it was probably a buck looking for the deer we had passed back down the road. I know what I saw. Deer are not as fast as what crossed the highway that night, and they don't run on 2 legs.